Webcomics are the reason I started my channel, and actually one of the reasons I decided to take art seriously, or well, as serious as I take anything anyway. So, in this video, I'll be talking about how I've approached webcomic making in the past and present while drawing the first page of the prologue to my up-and-coming webcomic called Erondelle. When I first got into webcomics, I think I was like 9, 10-ish, and it started with these two comics called Stupid Short EV-Comics and Evolution Squad. These two comics were what really got me into drawing, and they hold a special place in my heart. While Evolution Squad was more of a narrative-driven comic, SSEC was, as the title suggests, a daily gag style of comic with a hint of lore. These two comics were wildly different, despite having the same core, Pokemon and more specifically, Eevees. 2016 was the time I first wanted to make a webcomic, and even made my own versions of those Eevee characters I saw in the other two previously mentioned comics. I scribbled them down during the after-school program my elementary school offered, and checked Smack Jeeves and DeviantArt every day for a new issue. The fact that I was so dedicated to somebody else's comic was the motivation for me to start my own. I wanted others to feel so enamored with my stories and characters, to check every day for an update, to build a community who cared just as much as I did. And that feeling never really left. It is still, to this day, a motivating factor as to why I want to write and publish a webcomic. The reason I'm even telling you this, by the way, is just to let you know that it's okay to want an audience, and you don't have to feel bad about craving positive attention and recognition for your work. As long as you're not a total douchebag or really annoying and rude about your work, then it's perfectly fine to talk non-stop about your characters, to put hours into something others would probably deem as nonsensical. Be your biggest fan, and eventually others will want to be one too. People like passion, because we're at a point in the world where being passionate is looked down upon. Hustle culture is a huge issue in the 21st century, and the internet is filled with quick cash grabs, rage bait, and soulless content meant to take advantage of your wants and needs. You've probably heard a ton of people say this recently, but it's really easy to tell if you're not being authentic. It doesn't just show in your work, but it shows in the way you talk about your content, the way you promote it, and how it burdens you as a person. A webcomic isn't something you have to do. It's something you want to do. You don't have to make a webcomic to grow an audience, and you don't have to make a webcomic to earn money, and you don't even have to draw a webcomic if you don't want to, nor do you have to write one. If you want to grow an audience for a webcomic, then go for it. If you want to make money off of a webcomic, then I hope you at least have a part-time job to support you. And if you want to draw a webcomic but don't enjoy writing, then partner up with somebody who does, and vice versa. You know, as of recent years, I was always on the fence about making a webcomic. I thought it would just be a waste of my time. I thought that maybe some other forms of content creation would do my characters justice, like making a game or a show or writing a book, because I was scared that nobody would like my art, or I'd get too frustrated and give up. And at one point, I thought maybe just not do anything at all. Maybe my characters are okay as just being OCs. Characters that I can just share and draw for fun. And you know what? I've come to learn that that's okay. If you just have OCs that you think are cool and like drawing and feel like you don't need to put them in a fully fledged franchise, then that's awesome. But after some time, I realized that I didn't want that. I didn't want to just shelf my characters and give up on their story. I wanted to make a webcomic, and I want to have others and even myself feel the same way I did all the way back in 2016. And even if it's only been just over a month of this channel, I've gotten so much support and comments about how I inspire them to rethink their characters, or how my videos give you motivation to draw, and that just means the world to me. And I hope that in the near future, my content will continue giving you motivation, or inspiration, or even as little as entertainment. But anyway, that jumble of motivational sap over, let's get into my first webcomic and my current webcomic. The OYSTER Exchange was the beta version of my original webcomic, Erondelle, and I only ever wrote/drew 8 issues of this comic, which I uploaded onto Webtoon. It was supposed to be a short story introducing the dynamic between Esmeralda and Victoria, but I never ended up seeing it to completion because of a few factors that we'll get into. Now, I plan to do a way bigger video on art style once exams are over, so we'll touch on this topic briefly, but in short words, it's ugly. But in long words, I hate everything about it. The designs were basic, the colors were washed out, the characterizing, oh, the characterizing. Not to forget, posing and backgrounds, the inconsistency in literally everything, and the time. Oh my god, the time it took to draw all of these was ridiculous. It was torture. Considering page 1 of Erondelle is being drawn in the background, you'd think these new pages would have taken me, what, 1-2 hours to draw at most? Well, I'll tell you this. Heck no, it did not. It took me, and I kid you not, it took me days per page. I genuinely have no idea why it took me so long to draw these pages. Like, page 1 took me 3 hours to sketch. Meanwhile, the page in the back took me at most 3 hours to complete, including the changes I made between scenes and using the feedback I got from my beta reader, also known as my mom, and including sketching. I should probably mention that I physically cannot sketch on camera. I have no idea why, but I can't. This is why you never see me draw or like sketch anything in these speed paints. And even then, it probably took longer due to this ridiculous coloring method I was doing in the back with this house. Which, you know what, was actually kind of helpful, but I have never drawn that way before, so it took me forever. And crazy, page 2 only took me an hour and a half to complete. And this isn't a flex, by the way. I'm like a really slow artist and everywhere imaginable. But I should also mention, I drew this 2 months ago. Yeah, I drew this in April. And the only thing that I really changed from April to now is like in my drawing process was just using one brush rather than a million Clip Studio stamp brushes that I use in this comic, which, you know, let me point it out. It is painfully obvious to see what I drew by hand and what was a brush. So why did this take me 8 hours to complete? I'll tell you why. The art style and backgrounds. I distinctly remember telling myself to use a simplified version of my art style. Yeah, I don't see a single difference unless you mean the fact that their anatomy is like slightly worse in the Oyster Exchange. And this is just a PSA to artists. If you are comfortable drawing a certain way in a certain style and you're working on a big project, whether that be an animation, a webcomic, or whatever the heck, maybe don't try to screw with your art style last minute and absolutely botch your workflow in the process. Like, even now, my art style has much to be desired, but that'll come with time, not brute force. What matters currently is if I can draw consistently and efficiently. Like, I genuinely thought that I'd make my life so easy if I made the proportions of my characters, like, more cartoony, when I am in no position to do that. Have you seen my art? Another thing was the background. Guys, backgrounds matter, and if you're going to make a comic, you need to have at least one hint of a background per page. But if you're going to make a background, at least try to put half the effort you put into your characters into the background. I know I'm gonna get a lot of boos about this, but oh my goodness, webcomics is like a huge juggling act of priority, because unlike animations, you're working with a still image that needs to feel like it's alive. In an animation, there's usually something moving, whether that's a camera panning, a character, or something in the back. Or it can even be like the voice acting that keeps things like alive and feeling well. With webcomics, you are relying solely on a PNG to keep your reader's interest, which is why I try-harded so much in this first page. Like, this establishing shot in the back is the first thing you see. This is the make or break between whether I continue to scroll down and keep reading or find something else that's objectively more eye-catching. You will have a horrible, disgusting time keeping interest if your first page is ugly, which is why I am so baffled by my cover page of the Oyster Exchange. Look at this! Look! Oh my gosh, like, here we go again. Stop changing the art style. Please, Fang, stop changing the art style. Why did I do lineless? Like, genuinely, why in God's name did I decide to use lineless art as my front page when every other page is made up of the sloppiest sketches on the planet just colored over? Anyway, back to the backgrounds. Can we just talk about these colors? Why am I using less colors than a gas station bathroom uses in their interior decoration? And why do I have 8 billion shades of warm gray followed by a muted dark teal and brown? Also, this background paired with the bright pink on Emery's head is just painful to look at. This comic was also a pushing motivator as to why I got rid of the pink in Esme's hair and switched it to brown. It did not look good in any shot I put her in. Because it just makes no sense at all in her design to have like pink on her head. I'd find VL sporting a watered down cerise pink before Emery even goes near hair dye. Also, can I just mention that I had no idea where the story took place back then? I knew I wanted them to, like, live around the water and have a docking area, but that was it when it came to Fang's plan on the setting. At least now I have a good understanding of where on Earth they are, because before I was just like, maybe this is in France. So I googled black and white photos of France from the 50s and called it a day. No research put in whatsoever. But thankfully now I have a determined setting, and I know how all the buildings will look, and the landscaping, and also, yes, Ville de Perle is still a coastal city. Anyway, the majority of this comic takes place in this little alley. Don't ask me why, I have no idea. And it ended when Victoria was about to have her little woe is me monologue, followed by Esme introducing her to her mother, which makes literally no sense in canon. But I digress. My old webcomic was a disaster that made literally no sense. And even if it did only run for a couple weeks, I learned a lot from it, both about myself and my characters and story. I learned what I liked and what I disliked, and that's all that matters. Now, on to present day. Let's talk briefly about what I'm going to be doing with Erondelle. Erondelle is a drama/sci-fi webcomic based on the Erondelle family and their oldest daughter Victoria's incriminating discovery about their post-apocalyptic recovering city. She's now on a mission to expose her family's wrongdoings. The webcomic is centered on the relationship dynamics of the Erondelles and their supporting cast, with a fantasy-esque science and a hint of sociology and a dash of action and romance to boot. Each character will have their set amount of chapters dedicated to them and the world they're surrounded in. I want to really flesh out their world and character before I place the main story in the spotlight. Consider the chapters before the main conflict to be like a season 1 of a show where you get familiar with all the characters before we get into the overarching narrative. Now, I'll leave that there as to not spoil anything before the release of the prologue. Speaking of which, Erondelle's 10-page prologue is expected to come out in August on platforms Tapas, Webtoon, and Comic Fury, while the actual comics is suspected to be out in a year or so from now. I really want to do this right, so I'll be working on a lot of buffers behind the scenes, but don't you worry, I'll be doing plenty on the channel to keep you satisfied until the release of Erondelle, whether that be streams, art challenges, art talks, or whatever. So if that narrative interests you, subscribe and turn on notifications to know when the announcement video of Erondelle is coming out. I'll leave that link to the OYSTER exchange in the description, by the way, if you want to see my old work. Oh, and thank you for watching all the way here, and especially thank you to these stunning toothies who have drawn me fan art here. I love each and every one of these drawings with my whole heart and soul. And with that, have an amazing day or night, keep making OCs, and stay toothy. Bye-bye!